FPL Gameweek 38 transfer targets. In today's video, we're going to cover some of the obvious picks. We're going to talk about Salah, the Arsenal midfielders as well, but then we're mainly going to cover some differentials that you should be considering to make up those final bits of ground going into the final day of the season. What is up, everyone? FPL Harry here. Before we dive in, 1,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new around here as well. And today we're having a look. 1 week punts, no future planning. It is the final week of the season. Some of you will be chasing ranks. Some of you will be trying to hold ranks. So that will depend how differential you want to go on the final day. If you're chasing, you'll need some big differentials. If you're not chasing, then you'll be looking to buy some of the obvious players. Now, we're going to go through all of them. We're not going to massively cover the players that are already highly owned, the likes of Cole Palmer, the likes of Erling Haaland, the likes of Phil Foden, the likes of Nicholas Jackson in there as well, even Son Heung-min. These players we're not massively going to cover because they're already in most of our teams. Now, before we have a look at individual players, it's interesting to see what the projections are for the weekend so you can try and understand which teams you should be probably looking to target. Now, in terms of goals scored going into game week 38, Arsenal, Liverpool, Manchester City and Spurs are the 4 teams predicted to score the most goals this week, with Chelsea and Crystal Palace being the other 2 teams, both at home, predicted to do quite well in terms of goal scoring ability this week. Now, defensively, it really is the big 3. So Arsenal, Liverpool and Manchester City all playing at home that have the best chance of a clean sheet going into game week 38. So if you're looking for a defenders or a goalkeeper, those are the real teams that you're looking to target. The other big question that I know I'll get on this video is, should you be considering taking hits going into the final day? Personally, I don't massively think hits are worth it in game week 38. The reason for it is basically the player that you bring in, the first return they get is completely useless. That's just paying off the hit, right? So if you bring in Saka, Havertz, Salah for a -4, the first return they get is just getting you to break even point on the hit. And then they have to get points on top of that. So they need to be getting 2 returns at a minimum to even consider paying it back. But if you're selling a half decent player like a Bruno Fernandes, if he's fit, a Gordon, if you want to go with him, an Isaac or someone else, it's probably not going to be worth a hit. Now, if you decide to captain the player that you're bringing in as a differential, then potentially, and if it, is 2 good transfers and you're chasing, potentially you can consider it. But generally, I'd err on the side of caution of not taking more than a -4 going into game week 38. Now, the majority of you are going to be using your transfers on midfielders and forwards this week. So just to very quickly cover off some defenders and goalkeepers that I would be considering buying this week. You've got the obvious buys, you've got the differentials, and then you've got a cheap pick for each of the positions. In goal, of course, the Arsenal goalkeeper in David Raya, if you have a spare Arsenal slot, is the goalkeeper I would go with. 50% chance of a clean sheet using the odds we've just looked at going into game week 38 at home to Everton. A differential is, of course, Liverpool at home to Wolves on the final day, Klopp's last game. Wolves have not looked nearly as good over the past few weeks as well. You could go with Alisson, who's better for bonus and saves than David Raya is probably. And then the cheap option I've gone with, there are not loads of cheap options. You could go with Dean Henderson at Crystal Palace with Aston Villa at home, but I've gone with just 4.3 million Muric of Burnley at home to Nottingham Forest on the final day, given that Forest don't really need to be scoring loads of goals. They just need to make sure they don't concede loads on the final day to make sure they're in the Premier League for another season. Into defence, again, the obvious thing would be to buy a double up on the Arsenal or even your first Arsenal defender if you don't have one. So Ben White, Gabriel Saliba or Joshua Gvardiol. Those are the ones that I'd be looking at, but they are so massively owned already. The majority of you have already got them. If you want to take a differential, I would go with Trent Alexander-Arnold if you have the money to go with him. Wolves at home on the final day is a fantastic fixture. I expect them to do well, and Trent surely is always involved. A couple of others to mention are Andy Robertson if you don't have the money for Trent, or Reece James. If we get news going into the Game Week 38 deadline, of course, with all the games kicking off at the same time, we often get news of team lineups. If we know that Reece James is going to start game week 38 for Chelsea at home to Bournemouth, he could be a fantastic pick, but I'm not certain at all that he's going to start. Finally, we're going with Munoz of Crystal Palace. They were one of the actual teams looking at the predictions that probably outperformed maybe what I thought going into this video. Home to Aston Villa. He's playing really far forward as well, and Aston Villa don't have anything to play for now that Spurs lost to Manchester City, meaning Crystal Palace could have a field day on the final day at home as well. So looking to cover off some of these options to buy this week in midfield and up front, we're going to start off with the least differential, and every player is going to get more and more differential to the end. Then we're going to be having a look right at the end at a couple of big punts that virtually no one is going to own going into game week 38 that I do think could do well and do have some track record of some pretty decent returns as well. So starting off, we're going to look at the Arsenal midfielders. One of the most common transfers this week will be selling Bruno Fernandes or Anthony Gordon to buy an Arsenal midfielder going into game week 38 at home to Everton. Now, what you've got here are the four midfielders that you will look at: Saka, Havertz, Odegaard and Trossard, with the expected goal involvement per 90 that they have at the moment. What is worth bearing in mind that Trossard has the least predicted minutes out of all of them. Havertz has the second lowest, then probably Saka because of a slight injury, and Odegaard is predicted to play 90 minutes in pretty much every game. However, looking at the underlying data, Saka is the clear favourite with 0.81 expected goal involvement. Havertz is just about second because he's likely to play more minutes than Trossard, and then Odegaard with the lowest underlying data. Now, you can look at data all you want, but we want to take a punt in game week 38. And although Saka has the best data, he is currently yellow flagged. We do expect Saka to be absolutely fine though. I wouldn't massively worry about him. But I do think Kai Havertz is the punt that I'm going to take, and I probably would recommend you taking as well. One of the reasons that Saka is so high up is the fact that he takes penalties, but it's very difficult to predict a penalty in a specific game. It's great owning a penalty taker over the course of 5 or 10 game weeks, but buying a player for a single game week because he's on penalties, rather than buying the player up front, you're just hoping you get lucky with the player on penalties getting one. So I do think Havertz will start. He'll start up front at home to Everton on the final day. He's so involved. He rarely blanks at the moment. So I do think Havertz is my number one pick. Saka is second. I'm just not certain on enough minutes for Trossard. So I'd probably go Odegaard third, Trossard fourth. But I do think Havertz is probably the one. But Saka is just the safest if you want to hold rank this week. Next up, and actually going to be slightly more differential, but a lot of you are considering buying him into your teams this week, is Mo Salah. Wolves at home. It is Klopp's last game. They are absolutely going to want to put on a show. Mixed form for Liverpool recently, mixed form for Salah, but they are scoring goals, and I just expect him to be on firing form going into the final day of the season. If you have the ability to go for Salah with a free transfer, I probably prefer him over the Arsenal midfielders, but the majority of you don't have the luxury of being able to buy Salah for free. Most of you will be asking, Harry, should I be buying him for a -4 this week? Personally, I'm not sure he's worth a hit unless you're going to put the captaincy armband on him. If you want to go big differential and captain Salah as a midfielder with the extra point for a goal, the extra point for a clean sheet, over going for captain Haaland, then the hit for Salah starts to pay off a little bit. It is a big gamble, but I wouldn't go for a Salah over an Arsenal midfielder unless you're going to put the captaincy armband on him and really hope for a bit of luck going into game week 38. Spoiler, I do think Haaland is probably the best captain in game week 38. Salah is close second, and the Arsenal guys are up there as well. The data for Salah is fantastic. So as I say, if you can afford Salah for free, he's probably the best 1 week punt you can take this week, but I would only take a hit for him if you're considering captaining him as a differential against Haaland in game week 38. Now, lots of people are talking about Havertz, Saka, Salah as differential 1 week punts, but what I would say is I'd be surprised if all three of those are going to be massive differentials going into the final day, because it's what everyone is doing as 1 week punts this week, is buying Saka, buying Havertz and buying Salah. Two players who will be differentials going into the final day is the Crystal Palace duo in midfield in Eze and Olise. They have been fantastic this season when they've played and when they play together alongside Mateta as well. Now, you can look at the underlying data. It's pretty close between the two in terms of expected points, but actual points per 90, Olise is wiping the floor with Eze. And if I was to pick one this week, I would go with Olise. In his last 10 starts, Olise has got 100 FPL points. That is 10 points per start in his last 10 starts. As I say, Aston Villa don't have anything to play for now. They've secured Champions League football with Spurs losing to Manchester City. Palace will want to put on a show on the final day, whether it's just to put on a show for fans, whether it's Olise and Eze maybe getting a move over the summer, we don't quite know. But there aren't many players who are actually going to punt on Olise and Eze in the final day against Aston Villa. As I say, most people will go for Saka, Salah, Havertz, but if you really actually want a true differential, the Crystal Palace mids and probably Olise is where I'd be looking. Now, just because you might not be able to go in midfield, there is still a big differential in Crystal Palace. As I spoke about, Munoz in defence, Olise in midfield, and Mateta up front is still a good option. Just 5.6% owned. The return so far since they've got their new manager has been absolutely fantastic. He's just about 5 million still, very easy to get to from pretty much any forward that you have. If you're looking to take a punt and you want a Palace option, but you don't have space in midfield, do not worry about not being able to get Olise. Eze is the focal point of the attack. He's absolutely scoring goals. He's had a little bit of interest for transfers. Absolutely no surprise about that, how well he's playing as well. Could be a great punt at a cheap enabler, right? So let's say you do want to go for Salah in for Bruno Fernandes, but you need money. You could do something like an Isak down to Mateta to free up Bruno Fernandes all the way up to Mo Salah. Or if you're just looking for a punt up front, he's definitely one of the best this week. Next up in midfield, if you still have a spare Spurs slot after having doubles in both Game Week 35 and Game Week 37, I do think Brennan Johnson away at Sheffield United for Spurs is a good option. Just 1.8% owned. Now, Spurs have scored 13 goals in their last 3 away fixtures on the final day of the season. They love going away on the final day and they love scoring goals in that fixture as well. Sheffield United as well are absolutely leaking goals. We've seen that. The first team in history to concede 100 Premier League goals in a 38-game Premier League season. Johnson was very unlucky not to get more returns in the double. If Son had scored that one-on-one, it would have been a Brennan Johnson assist. Really like him as a pick. If you don't want to go Eze and Olise, you have a spare Spurs slot. Johnson could be a really nice pick. We do know that Sheffield United are weaker defensively actually at home because they try and attack their opponent. It's their final game in the Prem. They'll try and attack Spurs a little bit. So I do think there will definitely be goals in this fixture. I wouldn't go selling Son if you own him for this week, for anyone wondering. And I think Johnson could be a really nice punt given we aren't expecting to see Richarlison back again this season. Now, moving up front, we've spent a lot of time this season talking about Liverpool forwards, but majority of the time it's been Darwin Núñez who looks wildly out of favour now. And Cody Gakpo at 7.1 million, just 2.4% owned, could be a really interesting differential. As we've said, we're expecting Liverpool to put on a show for Klopp in his last game at home to Wolves team who are pretty much on the beach now. Performances have definitely dropped off. Cody Gakpo could be the one. Now, there is a chance that Darwin starts the final game of the season, so do wait up until the deadline where we often get team news and we often know Liverpool team going into this deadline as well. Do bear in mind Gakpo at 7.1 million could be a really nice option. He's been pretty consistent since he's come into the team. Liverpool are scoring more goals with him in the team as well. If you can't get to Salah in midfield, you want a Liverpool punt. Luis Diaz is also really nice, but his returns recently have not been great. He's a midfielder. If you want a punt at cheaper than Salah, Gakpo up front could also be a great shout. And then we start to look at two major differentials. The first one, it was up front, and I'm going to go with Adebayo of Luton Town. Luton are at home to Fulham and have to overturn a 12-goal difference on the final day. I realistically don't think either us or them will think this is a realistic opportunity, but Adebayo has been a really big goal threat for Luton when he's been fit, and the period where he was unavailable from about game week 25 to 35, if he'd been available, I really think they would be staying in the Premier League. That's how big a goal scorer he has been from them. Fulham don't have masses to play for. Luton, it's their final game in the Prem unless they do score a load of goals. I do expect them to go out wanting to put on a show, wanting to score goals on the final day, at home as well. You could go for Carlton Morris, you could go for Adebayo, but with the bonus points, with the sort of way I've seen Adebayo play recently since he's been back in the team, 4.8 million, 0.9% owned, a fantastic cheap enabler and a great differential for game week 38. And finally, in midfield, I'm going with Callum Hudson-Odoi of Nottingham Forest. He has looked so good recently, cutting in from that left-hand side, finding that far post, 4.7 million as a midfielder and just 0.5% owned. 5.5 points per 90 this season. Burnley away on the final day. Both teams looking like they don't have anything to play for, expecting there to be some goals in this game. Again, Hudson-Odoi, if Burnley do not have the ability and do not try to defend him properly and always just show him down the line, if you continue to let him cut inside as he's done, and as a Chelsea fan, it's great to see him doing so well, but I wish we'd never got rid of him, then he can absolutely have a field day against that Burnley defence, who are leaking goals and have done all season. So he is my cheap midfielder, my massive differential for the final day. Bit of a punt in Adebayo, bit of a punt on Callum Hudson-Odoi, but some easier differentials to get to in the likes of Crystal Palace, Arsenal, Liverpool and Spurs if you fancy them for game week 38 as well. What I do say going into game week 38 is take a punt that you want. It is easy for me to recommend players who might have the data, might have the fixture, but use this as an opportunity to buy a player that you fancy buying for game week 38 and that you have a hunch will do well this week. So let me know what your one transfer is or your two transfers is. Most of you are just using one transfer going into game week 38. So let me know in the comments who your 1 week punts are. Is it anyone in this list? Is it someone else? We'll be back on Friday morning with my team selection. We'll be back on Saturday morning with my final decisions and then the Sunday deadline stream. And that will be it. The season of FPL, the season of the Premier League will be over. Thank you all for watching. 1,000 likes is the aim. Drop any questions you have about the final week of the season in the comment section down below. Subscribe if you are new around here, and I'll be back again very soon.